Show. I am the aforementioned Mr. What do we get out of this hour? Later in the hour, we'll talk to our good friend Jillian Melchior, who is back from her trip to Kiev. Swinging. Spring break in Kiev.
And she's brought you borscht.
I'm bored with borscht. But joining us now for a couple segments, one of my favorite guests, a brilliant man. I consider him our historian laureate in this country, Hoover Institution Senior Fellow Victor Davis Hanson, whose books include The Savior Generals. Welcome back to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Dennis.
Read the April 18th piece, and by the way, it was my last issue of National Review, so I have to renew. I got that thing where it's covered with a cover that says, this is your last issue. I don't know how it got to that, but I'll revitalize it as soon as I get off the phone today. National Review piece, The True Opponents of Immigration Reform. As is the case in this country, Vic, it seems like a lot of people dip their beak into the illegal immigration problem and make some profit off it, right?
Yeah. Illegal immigration is a very strange thing because the so-called reactionaries are the liberals, and the liberals are the reactionaries. People, if you ask for immigration reform, the reason we're not going to get it is because if you talk to people on the left, they like the present system. And if you said to them, let's make legal immigration ethnically blind and meritocratic so that people all over the world, regardless of how they look, would have an equal shot based on their skills or their education, they don't want that. They want to privilege a particular group on the southern border. And if you said to them, you know what, if somebody's been here for 5 years, they played by the rules, they've got a job, they're not on public assistance, okay, they can stay here. They don't have to go back to Mexico to apply for a green card and maybe even pay a small fine and go down the route for citizenship. They don't want that because there's a lot of people here, not the majority, but a lot that have had a DUI or they've been completely on public assistance. And so they want zero deportations. They don't want to make legal immigration based on anything other than proximity to the southern border. And to be frank, they don't want to close the border. So I don't think we're going to get comprehensive immigration, so-called reform.
In a nutshell, then, it would appear that we are practicing affirmative inaction at our border to some degree.
Yeah, well, the present system is what people want because the Wall Street Journal, corporate right, in the entertainment industry, hospitality industry, manufacturing, meat packing, landscaping, agriculture, they like the idea of inexpensive labor that drives down wages. Mm-hmm. And then I'd call them the La Raza ethnic identity industry, and they feel that middle-class people, 2 or 3 generations who happen to have a Hispanic surname can be self-appointed representatives of collective interest who don't have the same income because they just came from one of the poorest places in the world, in Oaxaca, Mexico. So I don't see that there's any drive or any impetus to change the system because when you get the when you get the Wall Street Journal on the same page as the Voice of Aztlan, it's a pretty strange coalition to break.
Well, let's say worst case scenario, Victor. Well, how these things simmer? And like you said, everybody, it's almost like a Tom Wolfe novel. Everybody takes, it's a Rashomon, whatever they need away from it, they take away from it. But what happens eventually? Tell me, and I guess it'll be in California first. I guess it just becomes a completely untenable position. But what signs should I look for?
Yeah, well, the only thing, Dennis, is that there is a $64,000 question, or I should say a paradox, and that is that people are leaving Oaxaca, where most people are coming in this third wave of immigration, and they're rejecting the protocols of Mexico, and they're coming up here because they want transparency and a free market economy, a constitutional system, meritocratic, lack of class and racial prejudice. That's why they come. And yet when they come here, they're indoctrinated almost immediately by a race industry that says, this is a very bad place. It's unfair to you. You got to have a Mexican flag on your car. You have to have your kids be radicalized by the university. So where does that all lead to? It leads to chaos because you can't say that California in particular is a bad place. It's racist, it's sexist, it's homophobic. But you know what? Millions of people are dying and risking their lives to come here. And then the other thing about it is that the people who are for open borders are always attempting to be exempt from the ramifications of their own ideology. They don't want to put their schools and kids in the Tulare school system where 1 out of every 2 people's first language is not Spanish. They don't want to drive down the 99 by Delano and with 2 lanes and see people, driving with lumber and not speaking English, falling off the road. And they don't want to have somebody come off the road, hit their car with no license, no registration, and no insurance. That's happened 5 times to my vineyard. So I just think it's kind of weird that Nancy Pelosi or Jerry Brown or all these people who are for basically de facto open borders don't want to live with open borders. They have the capital or they have the influence to insulate them. And so in their way of thinking, it's great that Juan and Maria cleans my house, Juan does my yard, I give them my extra clothes, I have a clunker once in a while, I give them a car. This is wonderful. But you know what? I don't want my kids going to school with their kids, and I don't want to, I don't want to go to their house for dinner, and I don't want them living in a trailer next to me, and I don't want 6 or 7 illegals down the road.
And immediately, the Pelosi, who, by the way, her community wouldn't even deviate water on its way to their community to go down and go to the farmlands that need it, she would immediately deem you racist. That's how.
One thing you can see is happening already is that.
Can you hold it, Vic? Because I'm up against the break here. I got to take, and we'll get to it. Hold that thought, because I hold them dear myself. And I'll see you on the other side of this. We've got Victor Davis Hanson with us. We're talking about immigration. Who's Victor? He's a preeminent historian, Stanford, Hoover Institution, senior fellow, Victor Davis Hanson, right after this Dennis Miller Show. You know what's so great about gold? It's the perfect diversifier for your portfolio because it closely ties in with stocks. When stocks go down, gold goes up. Any decline in the value of the U.S. dollar typically increases the price of gold. Now, it sounds like a no-brainer to me. If it's time to add gold to your portfolio, Blanchard & Company is who you call. Blanchard & Company has a long and distinguished history of outstanding customer service. You've heard the name many times over. So much so that they stake their reputation on it. They offer a 100% buyback guarantee to purchase your investment back at any time. Call 888-360-GOLD. That's 888-360-GOLD. Or go to BlanchardGold.com to learn more. That's 888-360-GOLD. 888-360-GOLD for the premier authority in precious metals and rare coins. Call 888-360-GOLD. Hey, folks, welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show, joined by one of my favorite guests. A clear-thinking man, this is, and he's Hoover Institution Senior Fellow Victor Davis Hanson. If anybody wants to question his bona fides about statements about the halls of academy, he's up at the Hoover Institution, which is up at Stanford, and he lives in the midst of many of our immigration problems in the state of California. Also the author of the book, The Savior Generals. Victor, I'm sorry, I had to break in for a break. Where were we, my friend?
Oh, I was just saying that, ultimately, if you don't have a border and you have a multiracial society, then you're going to have competing complaints from everybody. I mean, we have Asians now who are very upset that the Hispanic community wants to put quotas basically on Berkeley and say, we have to go look at race again, even though it was voted by a ballot initiative to be not permissible to take into account for admissions and employers. But when you have a society like California where whites are the minority, so you really can't say, hey, all these white guys took over Berkeley or Davis. But what you're doing with illegal immigration, you're bringing in more and more people, and you're giving them serial amnesties, and then you're making a Latino majority. But for the state to work, the Latino majority has to be assimilated, intermarried, and integrated and have the same classically liberal ideas as the old majority did. If it doesn't, it's going to do what it's doing now and telling the Asian community, hey, you guys, whatever you're doing, stop, because there's too many of you in Davis and Berkeley, and we want more Hispanics, not more Asians. And I see that's the future of all these factions that are going to be competing against each other in a very brutally, racially, and scary fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yes, think of the bride tossing her garter. the entitlement garter. Everybody's going to be jumping for it. Those scenes can get rough. Victor, I have a counterintuitive notion. It might be a Swiftian proposal, but why don't we just, instead of slowly, incrementally, by 1,000 cuts, have California taken back into Mexico through the, I don't know, if we're not going to have borders, why not have a border and give it back to them right now? I think Mexican people would shut it down themselves at that point.
I can't figure it out, because they did a Pew poll in Mexico last year, and it said 56% of the people wanted to leave Mexico and come to California or the southwestern United States. 57% said that they felt the southwestern United States still belonged to Mexico. And you think, well, if it still belongs to Mexico, and you want to leave Mexico, why would you want to go to something that would be Mexico? It doesn't make any sense. Obviously, they're leaving Mexico because they don't like Mexico. They want to go someplace else that operates on principles and protocols that are not like Mexico's, and yet they think it belongs to them, and they want to go there. Otherwise, what's going to happen if you turn the southwestern United States under the same system as Mexico? They would want to go where? To Oregon, Washington?
I think they would. It's like when a corporation sells to somebody else, a bigger corporation. They sometimes keep the guys on to run it. You know what I mean? I think they'd hire us to run it, maybe, when they retake. I say to
my students all the time when I see a Mexican flag on their car, I said, "Well, what? You know, I can see that everybody put Italian or Swedish, but what's so good about Mexico if you guys left it?" And I know that's the immigrant.
Well, what happens, romance, Victor, when you say that?
Nobody wants to go back and say, hey, I'm in the United States now. I don't like your racist, transparent judiciary. Hey, I don't like your racist, discriminatory free market system. Hey, I don't like the idea that you're supposed to hire on merit and not who your first cousin is. I don't see anybody complaining against the American
you just
system.
Want to say, well, then that would make us Mexico, in answer to those queries.
Well, that's the problem with the left. If you're getting 12 and 13 million people from Mexico, but they're not adapting a different mentality, and they're not integrating and intermarrying and assimilating as they did in the past, but they're going to remain a collective bloc that needs there are constituents that say, I'm victimizing you, but then there's no need to come here because you'll just be like Mexico. That's what's happened in some of our small towns in the San Joaquin Valley.
God, it whirlpools in on itself. What an amazingly weird time to live in America, folks. We're talking to Victor Davis Hanson. I don't know, Victor, I don't ask for sensible reforms from many people because they always just give me their agenda-laden stuff. I actually think of you as a reasonable, wise man. Are there any sensible reforms? And if they're so sensible...
Yeah, I think there are, Dennis. I think the first thing you do is you sit down and say, okay, here's the reform. We close the border. We just say, we don't know how it got open, but it was a mistake. We close the border. Now we got 13 million people. We say, you know what? We can't... This isn't the division of India and Pakistan in the 40s. We got to do something. So here it is. Anybody who has come here and is on public assistance, I'm sorry, but you came here to work and you didn't, you got to go home. Anybody that has a DUI or a felony, I'm sorry, you came here to work, but you broke the law, you go home. Anybody who smelled amnesty in the air and just got here the last year, you go home. However, if you've been here for more than a year or two, whatever, and you haven't committed a crime and you're not on public assistance, and that's probably 8 or 9 million out of the 15 or so million, then here, stay here, pay a fine, go through the process, get a green card, become legal resident, and then we'll apply. If you want to apply for citizenship, go ahead, but you're going to have to wait till all the legal immigrants that you cut ahead of. And I think everybody would agree on that. But like I said, I don't think. And then we're going to make legal immigration, only legal immigration from now on, and it's going to be based on ethnically and racially blind criteria. But that's what's crazy about the Republicans. They keep talking about Jeb Bush, amnesty, and act of love, and he has no clue that the opposition does not believe in merit or racially blind criteria. This is an ethnic, chauvinistic, triumphalist emphasis behind this reform bill.
Mm-hmm. We're talking to Victor Davis Hanson, and we have been discussing a National Review piece from April 18th, The True Opponents of Immigration Reform. I want to move it over to Nat Review online piece of April 16th, Progressive Insurance. The simple fact is, Vic, if you have the right initial after your name, boy, they'll go to great lengths to protect you even after grievances that would do in somebody on the right?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like medieval exemption. If you're the Steyer brothers, then you're just trying to help the political system by injecting $100 million in it. If you're Al Gore and you're going to make $20 million by selling your failed cable franchise to a fossil fuel-burning medieval monarchy, then it's okay. And if you're Paul Krugman and you want to lecture people on inequality and you want $250,000 for being a professor and teaching no classes when part-timers make $3,000 per class, it's okay. So what's happened is I don't think the Democrats really believe in egalitarianism or equality. That's just sort of a badge you wear to say that you're really a wealthy, well-off guy with a lot of influence and power, and you feel bad about it, and you're a Democrat, and you're a liberal, and therefore you can keep on enjoying it. That's pretty much what we're down to now.
And not only is it a badge you can wear, Victor, I think you have to have a certain career in this culture. Honest to God, you have to establish bona fides, or you won't have the career that you maybe aspire to. And
I think I guess in the entertainment, it's sort of like being cool. So if you're Chris Rock or you're Jay-Z, Jay-Z was wearing a medallion the other day that basically was from a religion that says it hates white people. And Chris Rock says, Happy White People's Day. Or if you're Colbert, you can imitate people. I have no problem if you believe in free speech and people want to express themselves. But if anybody doesn't have, as you say, the right badge on, then those are felonies almost in our society. And I think everybody understands that, and that puts enormous pressure on people in academia and the entertainment industry, politics, the media, to at least allege that they're liberal and caring and progressive, because that's sort of taking out insurance. It's a progressive.
You're covered.
Insurance.
We've been talking to Victor Davis Hanson. He is a good friend of the show, a very smart man. He's the author of many books, Start with the Savior Generals. He is a Hoover Institution senior fellow, and like I said, I could listen to him all day. It is a voice of wisdom, and it rings clear to me at all times. Thank you, Victor. Have a good day, my friend. We'll talk at you down the road. Jesus, he's smart. 866-509-7268. 866-509-RANT, our phone number. When we come back after the break, some phone calls on the Dennis Miller Show. Hey, folks. Welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show. Joining us now, one of my favorite guests, an intrepid young dame. I think of her as the new Margaret Bourke-White out there, seeing the world up close and personal and reporting to us in an I say a factual manner. Senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, National Review contributor, Jillian Melchior. Jillian, what's up?
Hey, just got back from Kiev, and boy, was it a trip.
Well, now, when you leave Kiev and you're on the runway, do you wear? I remember Larry Gelbart, the famous comedy writer, told me that when he was with Bob Hope in Vietnam, he said even when you got off the ground, you had to worry about ACAC. How active a site is Kiev? Were you worried as you took off, or?
It was actually, it's pretty tame. It's definitely a city that's anticipating potential warfare.
Yeah, but it's over the hill.
Right now is very tense. They don't know whether Putin's going to march and then invade. And, it kind of reminds me of that scene in Casablanca where they're just sitting in Paris waiting for the Germans to roll, and it's very much that atmosphere.
Right.
With the caveat that the Ukrainians are actually ready to give a fight, I think.
Well, in an odd way when you say that, and I realize the stark nature of conflagration, but there's almost a romantic notion to that you have to live in the moment because hell might be right over the hill. So I'm not trying to I'm not trying to dilute that down, but I'm saying it must have been interesting times in the city.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's kind of a romantic mood to it because what this city has just been through, they stared down their domestic threat. They had a revolution. It was largely peaceful and ended up overthrowing the sort of dictator-like President Yanukovych.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely that mood of hope, that sort of confidence and unity, and a very serious sense also of sacrifice that 100 people died in the process of this. Domestic threats out of the way, but now we've got a foreign threat marching in, kind of interfering with their nation-building process, and I think that's really tragic.
What do you think the ratio is of people who don't want Putin anywhere near to people who would welcome Putin back?
You know, I was looking at it. It's kind of hard to tell because Russia's actually done a very good job with propaganda, getting it out to the Western media, kind of trying to paint the picture differently than it seems like on the ground. I know in Kiev I couldn't find a single person who wanted Russia to march in and quote-unquote liberate. If you look at some serious sociological polls, it estimates that even in the East, where there's a higher concentration of Russian-speaking or Russian heritage people, it's still only, about 68% want to remain Ukrainian. So I definitely think it's a strong majority of people who really care about their country, care about their citizenship.
Well, certainly that is a bit of a to know that Putin has the former USSR disinformation apparatus up and running certainly sends that's a grim note off in the distance, because they were always state of the art with disinformation. So of course they're going to be state of the art at making us feel like it's more people welcoming to their reintroduction into the scene than not, right? We're talking to Jillian Melchior. She's home from Kiev. We're glad to have her back on the ground. I read her Saturday piece. I made Molotov cocktails. Geez, who was your bar instructor, as they say?
Boy, this was an interesting story. So when I was there, I spoke with this 19-year-old girl, and she looks gorgeous. She looks like a Brooklyn hipster. I mean, she's got this long red hair, red lipstick, short skirt, knee-high socks. But she's got a special skill, and that's that she, during the Maidan Revolution, made Molotov cocktails. Now, it was fascinating to talk with her. She speaks perfect English, loves F. Scott Fitzgerald. I mean, just could be an American girl.
Mm-hmm.
But her thing was that she felt so passionately about the revolution, and you've got Yanukovych's troops literally shooting into a crowd, beating up young people, using deadly force. So from her perspective, making Molotov cocktails was something that was justified as a means of self-defense. And it was really interesting talking to her, kind of hearing her story, because she was still really conflicted about it. I mean, I think she thought that it was justified, but by the same token, her end was Ukrainian unity. And it was interesting hearing her say that she was concerned that the people these Molotov cocktails might be used against were somebody's husband, somebody's brother, somebody's son, and that really she doesn't want to have to use Molotov cocktails again. She wants peace and unity in her country. But what I think is so interesting about her is she's indicative of a generation of young people who have, through the Maidan Revolution, learned some hard combat skills. Now, I think that's something that Putin should be really afraid of, because he's preparing to march into a country potentially, annex big parts of it like he's done in Crimea, and you've got a citizenship that's militarized in this way. I would think that would be a real potential for guerrilla warfare and something that would undermine potential Russian authority if they're able to claim more territory.
Yeah, they're not going to roll over as easily as he might assume. I would say her naivete, in a way, mirrors F. Scott Fitzgerald's, because while he often partied with the Peter Terre set, it seems like he was a bit supportive of the communist economic system, at least, right?
Yeah, he was, and that's actually something that she said really bothered her. She thought he was a beautiful writer, but she couldn't believe that he supported communism because, like a lot of young people in Ukraine, if you ask her what she wants, first thing she says is rule of law, liberal democracy, Western style. So that's really what this is about. It's about Russian-style imperialism, authoritarian in nature, versus a Western idea of liberal democracy, and I really think it's coming to play in a very forceful way in this region.
We're talking to Jillian Melchior. She is a National Review contributor, senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Remind me, Christian, in a second to query her about that forum. And you can follow Jillian on Twitter at JillianKM. It seems like you might have unearthed some backbone, spine, or at least some military training that Putin, I'm sure he's aware of, but he probably disparages from afar. But let's face facts. The numbers are quite overwhelming, right? I mean, just the nuts and bolts of how much stronger Russia is. It's how many times the soldiers? What's your guess?
Boy, it's pretty bleak. So when I was able to look up statistics, I found that Russia had 4 times the amount of soldiers, 6 times the amount of combat aircraft, and more than 48 times the military budget. And it's notable to keep in mind that Russia can't mobilize that entire force if it invades Ukraine further, but that's still, it's a David and Goliath fight. And what I think is also really interesting is that under the Yanukovych regime, we now know that he was Putin's puppet all along, but Ukraine had really scaled back its military. Another really important thing to note is that Ukraine got rid of its nuclear weapons, and that's because there was a promise that if it did so, Russia, the United States, and Europe, the UK essentially would protect its territorial integrity. Well, now you've got Russia marching in, and you've got the United States and the United Kingdom not really doing much about it. And I think that's a pretty significant compromise on our part that's really putting them in peril.
Well, it takes two armies to fight a battle. You've talked about the strength of the Russian one. It's obviously it dwarfs the Ukrainian one. But I'd be intrigued to know what's the feeling as far as the B story on the Ukrainian military? The populace might not have many pro-Putin feelings, but one wonders if the military is the key there. Would many of them turn quickly and jump over to the Russian side?
That's the question. We really have no way to know. It is notable that in Crimea, we did see a lot of defections. Whether there were actually as many as the Russian media has reported is in question, but there were some notable defections. It is also important to say that a lot of the people that came into power in the military and the police were either under the Yanukovych regime, again, a puppet of Putin, or under sort of Ukraine's more Soviet days. So there's definitely reason to question the loyalty of the military. That said, I met a lot of guys who are, signing up for the army, willing to fight for their country, and I found that pretty honorable.
Let's talk about Yanukovych for a second, because he was a monster, right? I mean, when we peel it back, police, is it a truth or a rumor, apocryphal or fact, the seizing wounded people from their hospital beds?
Oh, I'm sorry, my phone just cut out. I didn't quite hear what you said.
I was just talking about it's so horrific, I sometimes wonder if it's apocryphal, but Yanukovych, a complete monster. Was he indeed having his police, his secret police, I guess, taking wounded people out of their hospital beds?
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, I spoke with a young woman who actually volunteered with the military. So if you were a demonstrator and you got injured and were taken to one of the city hospitals, the police would pull you out of bed and arrest you. And in some cases, they'd actually disappear you. I had heard when I was there, more than 200 people still unaccounted for from Maidan. So, I mean, this is a bad guy. He's a guy that is behind a massacre of a peaceful protest. He's somebody that was completely decadent in his corruption. I went to the Yanukovych mansion, Medjugorje, and it's pretty appalling. I mean, this guy built a $1 billion estate, 343 acres, in just 3 years using money that he stole from the Ukrainian people. If you drive there, there's an entire lane devoted to him on the highway. Nobody else could drive on it despite the bad traffic, because Yanukovych was so corrupt that he felt he was entitled to his own entire lane 12 miles outside of Kiev.
What a pig. Jeez, what a pig.
I mean, this is a bad guy. He's a real problem, a lot of corruption.
Such a bad guy that he probably was able to get in the lane because he's schizophrenic. These guys are so nuts, for God's sakes. He probably did have two distinct personalities in the car. We're talking to Jillian Melchior, National Review contributor and senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. I have to ask you, why isn't it called a senior gal if it's the Independent Women's Forum? How do they still do that senior fellow thing? Shouldn't it be?
That's a good question. I'll have to run it by them.
Well, tell me about the Independent Women's Forum, Jillian. I cannot believe that women bid on Sandra Fluke. I'm still absolutely gobsmacked that they could trundle her out and she wasn't almost uniformly rejected by what I assume in the year 2014 are much stronger women than those who were perpetually stuck in Virginia Slims ads in 1968. But she sold big in the female community. It boggles my mind to find for me what the Independent Women's Forum is.
Yeah, well, it's a great group. It's some women writers that kind of touch on a lot of policy issues and try to do so in a pretty reasonable way, using lots of facts. And there's actually a big project we're working on right now called The Culture of Alarmism, about all the things that liberals think are terrible and are going to kill you that actually aren't that dangerous when you look at the science.
Well, listen,
I'm
starting to see that they're about to dial in on a couple things. One of them is global warming. And I don't know if I really have to think it's such a small thing to me. I don't think it's going to ruin the planet. I don't believe in man-made global warming, and if I do, I don't believe it's solvable. But I'm beginning to think that I'm going to start parrot the line, I think it's the worst problem that faces humans, just to get on with my day, because I can see they're ratcheting down now in this alarmism, and it's moved beyond political belief into a flat-out religion, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has, and I think it's really funny that in recent years it's not been global warming, it's been global weirding. So it's unusually cold. That's because we're having a weird effect on the economy, on the environment, rather.
All right, folks, we're going to take a break here, and then we will come back and spend some more time with our good friend, just back from Kiev, Ukraine, Jillian Melchior from the National Review on The Dennis Miller Show. Do you suffer from itchy skin? Mine has been worse than ever even this year. Whatever your reason for itchy, uncomfortable skin, I'm sure you're like me. You use the same old products each year and you don't get relief. Well, I want to challenge you to try something new. Tricom. It's not like the same old itch products in your medicine cabinet. Dermatologist recommended Tricom relieves itchy skin in minutes. Tricom is clinically shown to significantly reduce itch intensity and duration. And Tricom is backed by the itch-free guarantee. Listen to this. If Tricom does not stop your itch, mail them the empty tube and they'll send you a full refund. You don't see the big companies doing anything like that. When your skin is itching, when you're miserable and uncomfortable in your own skin, you want immediate relief that lasts. You need to get Tricom right now. Tricom comes in a blue and white box in the first 8 aisle, now at Walmart and other fine retailers. Pick some up today. See Tricom, TRICALM.com for terms and conditions of the guarantee. Hey, Christian, I just heard you swear.
But only you.
Did you guys catch it?
That wasn't over the mic. It was just in your ear.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, don't get angry. I was just trying to grab
I
you.
appreciate that. I was reprimanding the team.
That
That I'm tired of their you-know-what.
Listen, there are a few basic anchor stones that I build my participation in this show on. One of them is your complete indifference.
Yes, actually.
You're actually yelling at people down there? This is the point you've gotten Liev to by actually prodding him?
No.
Because I always assume it's just like he's got a knotted cloth in his colon, you're flossing him, everybody's stoned. But, I think it must be just easy down there. But you're actually yelling using that word with Christian? With Liev?
No. I was using that word in the sense of elimination.
All right. He used the term for feek.
Yes, I did.
We are joined once again by intrepid gal around town, in this instance the town Kiev, the country Ukraine, just back, Jillian Melchior, contributor to the National Review. In closing, I want to go back to the Ukraine for a second. Tell me, it seems like you met an interesting fellow, a Ukrainian military officer named Dmitry. He was based in Crimea when Russia invaded. Like many, was unsettled by the recent events. Does he hear the train a-coming, as they say, or what does he feel Putin's next move will be?
Well, he really broke my heart. I couldn't get a lot of information about what he did in specific in the military, because I don't know how much of what he did was classified. But he was just a sad interview, because I was standing there in his home interviewing him with his wife. They had their kid on their lap, other kids running around the house. So he's definitely a family man. And he was talking about how the odds of the Ukrainian military versus Russian troops are so far against their odds, he doesn't know how to predict the bloodshed, but he thinks it's going to be bad. But it's really a catch-22 for the Ukrainian government right now, because they can either, the West hasn't helped them, and there's an implication that if Western troops, either EU, United States, some combination, are going to come in and back them up, the Ukrainian military has to make an attempt to defend itself first.
Well, that's particularly saddening.
That's problematic, because it's going to be a bloodbath.
Bloodbath, especially when you're talking to a man who. A regular, common, good, decent man bouncing his kid on his lap was going to have to leave that sofa at some point and essentially put himself in front of a state-of-the-art tank. That's the personal face on it. Let's talk about the more bloodless military analyst face of Paul Floyd, Explain who he is and what does he see as the odds in a Ukrainian-Russian matchup, as they say.
Yeah, well, he's a military analyst with the global intelligence firm Stratfor. And basically, he said a lot of the same things that I've already told you, that Ukrainian troops are incredibly outnumbered compared to Russia, that the Ukrainian military does not have recent combat experience, while the Russian military certainly does. In addition to that, there's reason to question the loyalty of Ukrainian troops, because you don't know whether they're influenced by Yanukovich or whether they're Russian sympathizers. And then on top of that, they've already annexed part of the country, and they haven't really been able to stop it. So I think what Floyd pointed out that was so interesting is that there are a lot of Ukrainians right now that have military skills that they learned during the revolution. Now, that's not going to be so helpful staving off the Russian army from coming in to begin with, but it might be useful under Russian annexation, under Russian rule, as sort of a means of guerrilla warfare. And I think that's where the girl with the Molotov cocktails comes in.
Yeah, well, you can roll the troops, but at some point, I don't believe you'll be able to turn your eyes for a second on the populace, because those people are tough. I mean, that part of the world gives you rhino skin to some degree, and if they've already got 19-year-old beautiful girls, instead of imbibing in cocktails and discotheques, making Molotov cocktails, I would say that the population is steeled for the battle.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Well, it's nice to have you back, Joe. Where do you go from here? What are you working on now? I guess, do you rest up for a while, or do you hit the ground running back here? Once again, we're talking to Jillian Melchior, National Review contributor, one of my favorite journalists, senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. You can follow Jillian on Twitter at Jillian with a J, KM. What next, kiddo?
So I'm resting up, catching up from jet lag today and tomorrow, and then back in the office, and I'll write a bit more about Ukraine and then look for something else to investigate.
All right, my friend. Good to talk to you, Jillian. I admire your cojones.
Good to talk to you. Thank you. All
right. Yeah, she's. I always feel like she's a woman in full. And,
yeah, absolutely.
And covering heartbreaking things. But, God, she has the spine of a young person, a young idealist. It's nice to hear. All right, what are we going to do? 866-509-RANT. We talked to Jillian Melchior. Well, I'll take a break here. We'll gather our thoughts. You can queue up once again at 866-509-RANT, 866-509-7268. This is the Dennis Miller Show. Hey, folks, welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show. Joining us now, a good friend of the show. We've talked to Doug many times over the years, always about interesting matters au cinema. Doug Brody is the co-author of a new book called Star Power. I'm out of the loop on this one. Doug, welcome back to the show.
It's wonderful to be back with you. I hear your voice every day, every weekday. It's great hearing you speaking directly to me again.
Well, Dougie, I'm not hip to this book. The interview came about rather quickly. Flesh it out for me, as you always do, in your inimitable manner.
Yeah, sure. Well, about 12 years ago now, I got a phone call from out of the blue from a fellow named Jim Whalen. Now, as I found out, Jim was a very successful self-help guru, doing speaking engagements, talking to people about both professional and personal self-help. What he realized is that the most successful people in that career have books that they either sell and autograph at those sessions, or that can be purchased in bookstores or over Amazon or whatever. And also, it's not just enough to have a book where you say the same thing that everybody else says. You've got to have something unique and different to say, and a unique way of saying it. Remember that old line from the play Gypsy about strippers? You got to have a gimmick if you want to get ahead. You got to have a slightly different take on it. And maybe the most successful ever was Chicken Soup for the Soul. And Jim Whalen came up with his own idea, and we might actually describe it as, we couldn't legally use this term in the book because it's copyrighted, but Chicken Soup for the Movie Lover's Soul. The idea being that everybody, including those people who are seeking self-help professionally or personally, love movies, whether it's the most recent ones, classics, whatever. And most of us go to the movies mainly for fun. But as I said back in 1975 in one of my earliest books, movies don't have to be a means of escaping life. They can be a way of comprehending it and understanding it better. Well, Jim wanted a movie historian to work with him on the book. He went to various libraries, read one person after another, decided that the way I write is accessible to the general public rather than in some sort of academies, which I can't stand and he can't stand. I like to take, complicated ideas and put them in simple terms. You and I and everybody else has picked up a book, where the words sound so big and it makes you feel dumb. And as you know, I try to write exactly the opposite of that. I want to communicate with people. And so anyway, Jim called me and said, would you like to work with me on this book? What we'll do is we'll go through a series of approaches towards self-help personally and professionally, but in each case what we'll do, the subtitle of the book is basically How to Star in, Direct, Produce, and Write Your Own Life. And basically it's the idea of treating your life as a movie or a mini-series, let's say, and looking at each step along the way and saying, I don't have to sit here passively. I can do it actively. Now, other books have said that, but where do you get your best examples to do that? Well, Jim's idea, and he provided the outline of the book, and I provided most of the examples, was to go to one great movie, movies that you don't have to go out and seek and see. You've already seen them. Your favorites, Raiders of the Lost Ark or Pretty Woman or whatever it is, and look at them from a different angle, rather than just as entertainment. They certainly are that, but look at them as something you can learn from.
Wow, what an interesting... What a great idea on his part, and I do think he picked the right guy, because I know sometimes when I read about films, I literally have to put the appraisal of the film down, be it like Pauline Kael or somebody in the past, and just go, I can't follow this. I could follow the movie, but I can't follow this. So I like the accessible thing. Aren't you really just reversing Aristotle's thing, though, the old adage?
You said it. I hadn't thought of it in quite those terms, but you said it. What did Aristotle say?
Art imitates
life, right? And what I'm saying here, what Jim and I are saying here in this book from Sunderland Press, is that life very often imitates art, and it does that. And it can get you in trouble, or it can be very, very effective thing. I remember a little movie that Marlo Thomas and Alan Alda made 30 years ago or more. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but in it, Marlo Thomas is like a young girl. She hasn't met Alan Alda yet, and she's at a drive-in movie theater with a guy kissing him, and A Place in the Sun with Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor is playing on the screen. Remember that wonderful scene where they kiss for the first time? Sure. Anybody who hasn't seen it, you got to see it. It's just a great, great scene.
But
Marlo Thomas turns to the guy with her in the car and says, you look a little bit like Montgomery Clift. And as they kiss, it's shot in exactly the style of the scene in the old Montgomery Clift, George Stevens movie. And then the next shot, Marlo Thomas is walking around pregnant. Now, that's kind of a warning. It can be dangerous to imitate movies unless you're consciously aware that you're doing so. And I see it all the time. As a college professor, I remember back around 1991, I was walking through the hall of a college where I was teaching, and there were a young group of 4 young women sitting together. The show Friends had just gone on the air, and they were having a discussion, and one says, okay, now, you can be our Rachel. Okay, you got to go get your hair cut like her, and you're funny. You can be our Phoebe. And the way in which we always tend to use role models in films or TV shows, we model ourselves on what they wear, what they do. Well, our advice from Jim Whalen and myself is take control of it. Don't let it take control of you. Really look at Raiders of the Lost Ark and see, there's that wonderful gag in that film where Indy is facing off this big guy, with the sword and everything and wants to fight him, and Indy pulls out his gun and shoots the guy. It's one of the greatest gags ever. It's actually lifted from an earlier B movie called Seven. But we'll give Spielberg credit for it. But the thing is, we all laughed at that scene. You can actually learn something from that because there's always a simple solution. I think that's one of the reasons so many people love President Reagan, because President Carter, however brilliant he was, a man, he would see the complexity of the issues and very often not be able to move. He couldn't see simple solutions. Other people say there's always a simple solution. You simply have to find it. I remember when President Johnson was being taken down by the Vietnam War. He had so many wonderful programs in so many ways, but the Vietnam War was destroying him. He couldn't figure out what to do. Nixon comes in, you know what he does? He ends the draft. All the protests ended immediately. Kids weren't going to protest if they were no longer scared about getting drafted. We can learn whether it's from the news, whether it's from movies, TV, you know, things that we just take as, well, that's just the news, and that's the presidents, or this is, you know, Julia Roberts in a film. If you look at them from a different angle, and the whole book is teaching people how to find that angle and say, wow, I get what you mean. There's always a solution to the problem, and the great movie characters are the ones who find that solution and make it work for them.
We're talking to Doug Brody, and the film is Star Power. He has a co-author, Jim Whalen. It sounds like an interesting approach to somehow, well, listen, I think we've all have found catharsis in movies and emotional connection in movies, but this almost seems more like some sort of tactical approach, the ability to gain knowledge from movies and use it in your own life. Or do you focus more on people's personal lives or professional lives?
Well, we try our best in the book to balance precisely that, so that if you're someone who needs, like, professional help, looking at somebody who, I don't know, I'm going way back now. Most people don't even remember this film. It just came to mind. But remember George C. Scott in the hospital? Where George C. Scott, follow up to Patton, where he's dealing with he's the head of a hospital. Patty Chayefsky wrote it. And he's dealing with one problem after another. But, as we sit there watching the film, they seem insurmountable. How could anybody handle that? The genius of the way Chayefsky wrote it is that the George C. Scott character will not let circumstances get the best of him. And he takes each problem, and on screen as the movie unfolds for 96 minutes, he sits there and solves them. And the whole idea is, if he can do it in his seemingly unresolvable professional life, you can do it. Or looking at Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. There's a wonderful arc to that character. She is so oblivious at the beginning of the film, the basically the street hooker she's playing. But by the midpoint of the movie, and we actually analyze movies in terms of story structure and stuff, and say, if a writer working with a director can do that to a scripted character, you can do it to a degree with your life. In real life, there's always things, the bus turns the corner and you don't see it coming. There are those things that happen in life that don't necessarily happen in movies. In certain great films like Inception, those random things do happen because they imitate life that more closely. But the idea is, what's that wonderful line from Alcoholics Anonymous? I can't even remember it now, but it's like, let me seize control of the things I can control and understand the things that I can't control, and let me have the wisdom to see the difference between the two. And Jim Whalen and I in the book always say, there's going to be some things you can't control. But again, to look at another great film, Terms of Endearment. Remember that Oscar-winning classic with Shirley MacLaine? And the idea of another one of those films that really follow real life in a certain pattern, because the first half of that film seems like a wonderful TV sitcom about a mother and daughter and the mother's love affairs, like with the Jack Nicholson character. But in the middle of the movie, it's announced that the girl has cancer. And they say, it'll be okay. And, of course, it's a movie. We assume it's going to be. But it isn't. It gets worse and worse. And it was one of those rare films that actually makes the changeover from comedy to serious drama and makes it work. So on the level of aesthetics, it's a great film, but also how we can learn from looking at that film to deal with those kind of coming out of nowhere problems. We may not be able to solve them in that movie. I don't mean to give the ending away, but they aren't able to save the young girl's life. But the way in which the mother guides her daughter through that, the way in which she grows from the experience, the way in which she's able to handle other things in her life, including the men in her life. Having been through that idea of how when you look at the great movies, almost always, not always, but almost always, there's a dynamic quality to the great characters. We watch them grow as people from beginning to end of the movie, and the thing is, it's all through the way they handle experiences. And we try looking at those movies, the great ones, the ones people love, to show that you can absorb it, you can learn from them, and there's a degree to which you can apply it to your life and make your life work out. Not perfect. First thing we say is, life abhors perfection the way nature abhors the vacuum. But you can make it better. And that's what we try to help people do.
If your inner writer is clever. Up next, more with Doug Brody, our good friend, about his latest book. This is a bit of a deviation from some of his other books. This one called Star Power, Creating Success Hollywood Style. Sort of gleaming magic moments, resonating moments in famous films, and applying some of them to your journey through life. This is the Dennis Miller Show. Welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show. Still with us is Doug Brody, who is the co-author of a new book called Star Power, along with his friend, self-help guru Jim Whalen. I happen to find old movies much wiser. Black and white, old movies, pre-1958, preferably 40s to 50s. You seem to cite some films, more modern films. Would you say the preponderance of films in the book considered are older or newer?
I'd say basically what we do is that with, recent films, they're all in there. Spielberg films, Lucas films. We borrow on Star Wars. We borrow on the big epics as well. Just because they're set in fantasy settings don't mean that they don't deal with life. I mean, there's a famous line, Obi-Wan Kenobi saying to Luke, "Don't think, Luke, feel." And we analyze what that means and how, you can surrender to the Force. To me, the greatness of the film was Lucas's, I did a couple of books on Star Wars a few years ago. I was talking with you on the show about it. We analyzed, the second trilogy or the prequel trilogy to look at what Anakin does wrong. His inability to see his place in the universe, and how you can avoid making the mistakes that he makes.
Hayden, by the way, I just have to intercede for a second, Doug. 1 second. Hayden Christensen's performance made me doubt the existence of God. Anyway, back to you.
Of course. And so with the old films, we tend to use the ones that not just, hardcore movie lovers, but everybody knows Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, King Kong, the original. We use a lot of the absolute classics that pretty much everybody who cares at all about movies has seen. And there are many excellent films that came out in 1935 that may have won the Oscar that everybody's forgotten about.
Yes,
maybe wrongly. But we don't get into that too much because it's for the general public, not just for a very small coterie of movie lovers. And the more recent you get with films, the more we're able to assume pretty much everybody, Avatar or something, pretty much everybody has seen it. Whatever
accessible.
And, what is Avatar actually saying about, despite its fantasy setting, futuristic or whatever, faraway setting, or for that matter, The Wizard of Oz? The idea of Dorothy's dynamic arc in that story, or the main characters in Avatar, where he learns that everything he thought he believed, he doesn't. Dorothy realizing that the only way she's going to get home is if she takes matters into her own hands. Scarlett O'Hara, and the way she handles problems or fails to handle them.
Well, it would sound to me then that I just have to intercede because we're up against it, but it sounds to me that self-determinism throughout film history might be something good to practice in your own life. Doug's website is dougbrody.com.
We also have one that is www.starpowerbook.com.
All right, Doug, we appreciate your time. Who's your next particular star you're going to focus on in your next book?
My next book up, I hope I can talk to you in December. I've got a book coming out called Everything I Need to Know I Learned from Watching John Wayne Movies.
You're going in harm's way. I'll be there with you. Take care, Doug.
The
Hey, folks, welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show. And what's happening? A lot of dates coming up. Ramping it up for the summer. Brother Love's Travel and Salvation Show. Carvey and I are going out. We'll be in Washington, D.C. on July 12th and Hollywood, Florida on July 13th. As I've said before, at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and in a gambling casino on July 13th, and I would say the first one, infinitely more vice. For more information, go to DennisMillerRadio.com and click on Dennis Live. Let's see, we're taking your phone calls. It's a mini Mackinac for the new listeners or new cities that we pick up. Mini Mackinac and Mackinac. Mackinac is a 1 hour of phone calls, anything your little heart desires. No topic is out of bounds. And Mini Mackinac, well, we got a little time left in this segment. I'm trying to make a cute play on words. So that's all. So anything you want to talk about at 866-509-RANT, 866-509-7268. And these are the same numbers that you can leave us a voicemail at. While you queue up, once again, 866-509-7268, I might as well play a couple voicemails. Linda in Chicago, voicemail number 2.
Just to rant a little about the whining thing. Yeah, the whining thing I see as part of that whole either exploit this way or exploit that way, and whining is one way to exploit. There's a lot of people who are out to get someone to do something for them. Like the exploited have become the exploiter. That's their M.O. I'm sure you know that, but just in case.
Well, thank you for venting, Linda, and I do believe that's to be true. I think in the past, if you'd told your child who went off to college, to the Culinary Institute, to major in whining, you might have meant that they should become a sommelier. But nowadays, I would say there's great hay to be made in whining, because not only does the squeaky wheel get the oil now, we even refuse to go for our own oil. Thank God some people, because I'm shocked at how in the pocket of the more strident members of the Green community this president is with this Keystone Pipeline. Thank God there's a bunch of people out there who are drilling on private lands and don't have to ask for government. But, how long before somebody's well is capped by a desert tortoise? That can certainly be coming down. They're just airdropping in desert tortoises like they used to do with pamphlets in Nam. Just shutting down commerce all across. How much money could he be getting from green considerations? The President Barack Obama would risk alienating that toad Rich Trumka and the union guys. I mean, it must be an unbelievable check that they're writing to them. But I agree that whining is the new way. Let's see. 866-509-7268 if you want to jump in. 866-509-RANT. And here's Steve in Missouri. I'm starting to notice more calls like this that are reluctantly acquiescent to what I've been pitching for a while, but I don't pitch it because it brings me any joy, folks. I'm trying to keep you appraised. As I said, I think of myself now as a real-time archaeologist. I'm just noting the ciphers. Cheryl in California, where is it? Steve in Missouri, number 7.
We look at what our country's going with and where it's headed, and it's ridiculous. We all agree. But like your last caller said, the Canadians are looking down at us, and a lot of Americans scratching their head, and they don't want to get involved, or we're losing our country. Remember the movie Helen of Troy? Well, big wooden horse is Obama. He got in somehow, and everybody's on the take, 50% of the country, so we'll keep them voted in as long as they get a check from the government. But that wooden horse is causing our demise, and it's unfortunate that a lot of us, 86% of us, don't realize that or don't care. It's really disgusting. I mean, especially the voters not voting and taking that opportunity to vote.
It's only disgusting if you're disgusted by it. I would tell you to think of Jan Michael Vincent holding the sand buckets in the great film Tribes, while Darren McGavin screams right in his ear. Think of the look on Jan Michael Vincent's face as he holds those sand buckets. Shoot for that. That's where you want to go, to that look, and to that inner sense of peace. Don't let these creeps in. They're grifters. They don't deserve to be that far in. Shrug a little and stay out of the way right now, because they're vile. History will correct this. All right, we're going to take a break, come back. We'll do some more phone calls. Some more voicemails. That's predicated on you. 866-509-7268. This is the Dennis Miller Show.
The Lord is waiting to take your hand. Shout hallelujah. Come on, get happy. We're going to be going to the promised land.
Do not watch any political shows this weekend. It's the first step. Don't give them your weekends. If you can't get out of it during the week, I guess you can't get out of it, but you should fight to get out of it. But definitely take the weekends off. Don't watch this crap about politicians. They're jerks, they're grifters, and they aren't half as smart as you are. Don't give them your weekends, for God's sakes. Joining us now is Todd Tarbox, who is the author of Orson Welles and Roger Hill, A Friendship in 3 Acts. How you doing, Todd?
Wonderful. Delighted to be with you.
I've read Simon Callow's books, and I've listened to the Bogdanovich interviews. I'm a Wells fan. I've seen Roger's turn up, obviously, in the books. Can you explain to our listeners the friendship between Orson Welles and Roger Hill?
Yeah, Roger Hill was Orson's headmaster at Todd School, the only schooling that Welles had or really needed. From age 11 through age 15 when he graduated. The Todd School in those days just went through the 10th grade. And during those formative years, they developed a very warm relationship which sustained them for the rest of Orson's life, really. From a teacher to a mentor to a dear friend. And I think it's one of the few relationships that Orson maintained throughout his life. And it was a mutual affection and respect.
Yeah, he was such a savant in many ways that it almost seemed difficult for Welles to concede avuncular status to anybody else.
That's true. That's true, and that was one of the unique, I think, points in this relationship. Is this was that one unique individual.
We're talking to Todd Tarbox. He has written a play, author of Orson Welles and Roger Hill, A Friendship in 3 Acts, a book as a play. Tell us about the decision to write the book as a play.
Well, there's an intimacy to a play, and it avoids my interference in large part. And they were also an homage to both of them, their enthusiasm for the theater. And I think that it's sort of there's a drama to Orson's life that unfolds, which is sort of compelling and poignant, and all those elements together made it appropriate. And also, it's the first experience I know of, and I've read a lot of books on Welles, that his private voice comes out for the first time. It turns out he's a very warm, as well as brilliant and witty fellow. But there's a warmth that I've never read anywhere else that is in this book.
How long did they end up over the course of their lives? How many years did they remain friends?
Throughout Orson's life, as a matter of fact, the last evening of Orson's life, they had a long conversation, which is in this book. So it was very almost life sustaining for Orson. It was not just a mentor, but it was a father figure. As you know, his father died when Orson was 15, and his mother died years before when he was 9. And not only my grandfather, but my grandmother, Hortense Hill, sort of functioned for decades as foster parents.
I guess they must have shared, i.e., the theater for certain, but I guess they had a bunch of mutual interests and enthusiasm.
Literature, theater, particularly Shakespeare and the Bible. Matter of fact, when Orson was still in his teens, he and my grandfather, co-created a series of Shakespeare plays adapted for high school performances, and Everybody's Shakespeare. So that was one of their early efforts. Before that, they worked on a play together that was a marching song, which was produced in Woodstock. But I'm hoping to get that printed. I think that's because that's another element that's in this book. Is there throughout there are flashbacks, and I use a lot of Orson's writing. From the time he was 10 years old, his writing was just phenomenal, insightful and charming, and just a remarkable character. And so that's his. I think one of the elements that I think a lot of people are unaware of is one of his enormous talents, which is underrated, is his ability to write. Mm-hmm. One day, someone should put together a book of his writings. If someone doesn't, I'm tempted, because it's remarkable how fluid he was in the printed word.
We're talking to Todd Tarbox. He is the author of Orson Welles and Roger Hill, A Friendship in Three Acts. Roger Hill is Todd's grandfather. We talked about Welles' father passing, I believe, in the early 30s, if not 1930. And at that point, I believe he asked your grandfather to become his legal guardian, and your grandfather demurs, right?
Yeah, he was, because there's a fellow by the name of Maurice Bernstein, who for years, when Orson was just an infant, entered the Welles family. And my grandfather felt it would be sort of devastate Maurice if Orson selected my grandfather. So he convinced Orson to, and also I think all of the financial they wanted to maintain a friendship. I think my grandfather, he didn't want to get involved with finances, but I think basically it had to do with not wanting to upset Bernstein.
Well, certainly he paid homage throughout the film. Yeah. Citizen Kane went to his avuncular friend. You hear Mr. Bernstein, Mr. Exactly. Bernstein in Sicily. It's like a New York Times style book note where he always has to refer to him as Mr. Bernstein. How early on, you're talking about Welles's writing, does he have any sort of obsession, or does he show some sort of overripe interest in death, even as an early man in his writing?
Yeah, when he was a preteen, he was putting on productions that dealt with that subject at Todd School. Yes, death held a fascination for him, and there's one of the wonderful chapters in this book is a reflection on death. And it was also in that particular section is. A marvelous ability they both had to almost finish one another's sentences. That they'll quote Shakespeare, they'll quote the Bible, and it's remarkable. And not only that, but the Catholicity of their interests. For instance, in a particular chapter where they go at some length on death, earlier in that discussion, they talk about a marvelous sort of experience at New Year's with contretemps, family contretemps. Happening on Times Square, so they range from the almost frivolous to the profound in each of the acts, as well as throughout the book. It's quite a tour de force, and I can say this immodestly because I did a good deal of editing and cleaning, but it's basically you're hearing both of these remarkable characters relating to one another.
Isn't it interesting, the guys who so often seem to have some sort of fascination with death, almost approach their life like they'll live forever. Anything I've read about Welles, it would seem sleep be damned, dietary guidance be damned.
That's a good point. It's very ironic, isn't it?
It's just almost, I remember when Hausman used to present the facts of things to him, he would almost damn Hausman and say, you're not thinking big enough, and we've got to go completely for it. So some guys who, I guess their one one Tumblr click away from obsessing about death. They seem to run from it by living very large. We're talking to Todd Tarbox. He's written a book. It's in the form of a play. Orson Welles and Roger Hill, his grandfather, a friendship in 3 acts. And what would you like to, I don't know, let me ask you this. Were you ever jealous of Wells and your grandfather as far as you and your grandfather, or was he have plenty of space for both of you?
Wells, I rarely met the man. I mean, he was sort of a figure in the family. My grandparents, of course, remained throughout their life, and Wells's life, very much implicated in his. But he was a character, and bigger than life in every sense of the word, character. And I would rejoice in his successes and sort of sorrow for the disappointments in his life.
What would you like the readers of the book, the book, to take away from it there, Todd?
Well, not only enjoying these 2 fascinating characters and what their take on life, but there's a subtle hope that people will have a greater appreciation and the importance of friends in their lives.
We've been talking to Todd Tarbox. And once again, the author of Orson Welles and Roger Hill, A Friendship in 3 Acts. Todd, we appreciate your time. I'm going to give this a tumble.
I appreciate yours.
All right, my friend. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Todd Tarbox. Yeah, I've read a lot about Welles, and it seems like he was almost disdainful of any sort of advice, especially from an not elderly, but anybody older than he. He seemed to bridle at it and fancy himself quite the enfant terrible. But I do know that Mr. Hills turns up as somebody he did defer to. And I guess everybody needs somebody out there on the perimeter line or they'll go absolutely bats. If you don't have anybody, I think that'll cave. I think then you're Elvis with the Memphis Mafia, and that can go badly rather quickly. All right, once again, the book is Orson Welles and Roger Hill, A Friendship in 3 Acts. And we'll have to give it a read. Like Todd said, he wasn't being arrogant there. He was saying he almost reported their conversations back and forth, which he's done a lot of research on, polished it up and put it in the form of a play. All right, The Dennis Miller Show. Hey, folks, welcome to The Dennis Miller Show. I am the aforementioned Mr. Miller. In our next segment, we'll spend a few minutes with Natasha Case. She's one of the brains behind the Coolhouse ice cream trucks. They're all over, and their upcoming 5th anniversary party, a new ice cream cookbook, all coming out. And, Christian, how have we been led to this segment? Certainly, I assume this is for a good cause.
Yes, it is indeed, and Natasha will tell us a little bit about the cause. But, yeah, they're having a 5th anniversary party down here in L.A., and because it's for charity, I refused comps. I'll have to actually pay to go.
You are such a little mini-mensch. Then, by the way, folks, do not forget this Sunday night, Christian's wife's Mad Men. And Christian, was she able to work with the great Wiener on it? And no, I don't mean...
no, you don't mean her boss, Matthew Weiner.
But did she write with him, or did she write solo?
The way it works is that you go off and write it. I mean, well, first you sit in the writer's room and you break the story, kids, and they all talk about it. And then the writer goes off and writes it and turns it in, and then Matt spends a little time rewriting it, usually over, a few nights. And, it's the process for everybody, and he gets a shared writing credit on this episode. Sure. So it'll say Matthew Weiner and Heather Jane Blatt. And for anyone who looks in their TiVo, they'll be able to see. The episode is called Field Trip. That's all I can say, because that's actually all I know.
God,
she doesn't tell me anything.
You must be so excited.
Very excited, yeah. We're going to have her parents and her sister over and a couple people, so we're very excited to watch it.
Wow, that's not your usual MO when you like to conquer her sexually while she's achieved something.
Yes, that'll be as soon
love during the segment.
As soon as they leave. Or maybe, before,
before
they leave.
No, that's a field trip. I might come down and watch.
I feel like Draper might be able to pull that off.
Right.
Keep some broad in a hotel room.
Flattery, her parents. Sitting there like eyes wide shut.
Exactly.
All right. Well, then we'll catch up with a good friend of the show, Joe Connor. His father, Frank Connor, was killed by FALN terrorists at New York France's Tavern. And I know what you're saying, my God, what a horrific story indeed. And then imagine the coda to that story is the man who was working for their release becomes the top cop in the United States of America, Attorney General Eric Holder. My heart always goes out to this kid. But I must say, that being said, he does the exact right thing. He'll never stop. He'll never stop. It's like Sharon Tate's sister, right? You see her? She shows up every time, and she just holds a picture of Sharon Tate while they literally sit there and discuss whether Manson should get out. What a crazy world we live in. That's so much of our justice seems to be final on people who don't deserve final justice. Like, we bring the hammer down on some people who you shake your head at and go, wow, how did they get chilled like that? And yet we still have to have this farce where Charles Manson might get out. So, or where Eric Holder becomes the Attorney General in the United States. So I like that Joe is always there, always reminds us, and he's more than welcome to come here as long as I have the show and remind us of Attorney General Eric Holder trying, while he worked for Clinton, to get a pardon for these FALN terrorists who killed his father. All right, taking calls, 866-509-7268. Let's get to the soup of the day, which is spiced chicken stew with carrots. And it's brought to you by AutoZone. For the auto parts, accessories, and advice you need, get in the zone. AutoZone. You know what I like to mix in with my spiced chicken stew with carrots and Christians? Just give it a little taste.
What's that?
STP.
Would it be STP from AutoZone? Get in the zone?
That's why I said it.
I would wash down that stew with an ice cold Samuel Adams.
This is also good. I lost my friend Andy Granatelli last year. So rest in peace, Andy. He was a good cat. God, he had funny racing stories. I told you about the time he took me to Indianapolis, and we stayed in the world's skeeviest hotel right in the middle of the track.
I love bad hotel stories. I don't know if I remember this one.
I learned, much like some of the yogis, to levitate myself. I was still tethered because I hadn't gone deep enough into, quote, the arts.
Of course.
End quote. To master, don't you love it when you're at a party? Is that, what signs do you have at a party? It's time to dive behind a sofa or say you have to wee.
Somebody busts out the arts.
Yeah. When somebody gives quote signs and says, I've been a practitioner of the arts, geez, I gotta pee. And I said, geez.
I appreciate that, and so do our friends.
I know, but I'm just saying, I had to make a pact with myself because I was having trouble. I wasn't taking the Lord's name in vain, but it's an old habit of mine. But to some people, it's a distasteful one. And I was trying to say cheese and crackers, but geez, that was hurting. So I just took off the syllable at the end.
I think that works.
And is G's okay?
I believe so.
All right.
Jeeves, however, is not okay. Never say Jeeves' name out loud.
Why? Do we have some other internet thing that's not asked, Mr.?
I'm just trying to get the Jeeves people's attention. Let's see what happens.
Anyway, where were we?
The arts.
The arts. Whenever I hear anybody talk about them being a practitioner of some sort of martial arts, float away. Because not only are they deadly boring, they're potentially deadly. You know, if you react poorly to their story about the arts, or, Lee could go in through your stomach, come up, get your heart, pull it out, and show it to you before you die. I'm always tempted to say, could he continue up, or was his arm not long enough, past the heart, up your throat, into your brain case, and selectively remove the part of the brain that's telling me this story?
I believe he could.
Well, then there's the problem. Because not only is he deadly boring at that point, he's irked. Now I've got an irked ninja on my hand. Hey. Are we, let's break that story down.
The irked ninja.
Now there is what do we, I don't think that's runs 2 seasons. I see that more as an 8 or 10 episode arc.
It's what we call an event series. Irked Ninja.
Irked Ninja.
Yeah. I can definitely.
Oh, you got to admit, that is a bang-up title.
I love Irked Ninja. You're kidding?
All right, taking your phone calls at 866-509-RANT, 866-509-7268. As I said, Carvey and I will be performing in Washington, D.C. on July 12th and Hollywood, Florida on July 13th. For more information, go to DennisMillerRadio.com and click on Dennis Live. I think I've attended that. Like I said, up next, all your phone calls at 866-509-7268. This here? Oh, howdy, ma'am. This is the Dennis Miller Show. Hey, folks, welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show. And joining us now is Natasha Case, and she and her friend, and I don't know how to pronounce this, so I'll ask Natasha in a second, have formulated an ice cream company called Coolhouse, and you hear a lot of buzz about it with the crowd in L.A. Natasha, welcome.
Thank you. So good to be here.
Tell me about, pronounce first your business partner's name for me.
Freya Streller is my business partner at Coolhouse.
All right. So tell me, where is the birth of Coolhouse? Hatch it for me.
Yeah. So for me, actually, funny enough, my background is in architecture. Mm-hmm. Of course, very related to ice cream.
Well, I thought it was when I saw the HAUS appellation.
Exactly. Dead giveaway. And I went actually through architecture training 7 years straight, from undergrad to grad, and I started getting into this idea of bringing food into architecture as part of the conversation to kind of open it up and make it more approachable and fun and accessible for people. And I called this idea Farchitecture, food plus architecture. Yes. So sort of a silly-sounding word. But I started doing just different projects under that umbrella. And one of the first ones I did when I finished school was Coolhouse. It was, this idea of triple entendre with the name, after Bauhaus, the German architecture movement, Rem Koolhaas, who happens to be my favorite architect. And because ice cream sandwiches kind of look like little cold houses, it's kind of a stretch. But anyway,
it's a cute name, though.
Yeah, I started making ice cream and cookies and naming the combinations after architects and just handing them out to friends at work as kind of comic relief for the impending doom of the recession. And it's just from there, the idea caught on. It seemed like people like it, and I met Freya, who brought a lot of the business sensibility to things, and we decided to purchase a truck and hit the road pretty much.
My favorite architect, Philip Johnson, so I went and saw him speak one night, and he was mad as a hatter. It was one of those disappointing moments where they often say, don't meet your hero. Not that he was my hero, but at least architecturally, he and Frank Lloyd Wright. Since I grew up in Pittsburgh near Falling Water, it always resonated with me. But I went to see Johnson, and I swear to God, he was bordering on the anti-Semitic. It was really creepy and weird. Anyway, it seems like, how many trucks do you have now? And we're talking to Natasha Case, and she has a company called Coolhouse, and it is with her business partner, Freya Streller, I guess it's called. Perfect. And they're doing a 5-year anniversary party on May 2nd. How many, you hatch it with a truck, but how many do you have now?
So now we're 10 trucks nationally, 5 in L.A., 2 in Austin, Texas, 1 in Dallas, Texas, 2 trucks in New York, and actually a cart in Central Park. We also have 2 storefronts in L.A., and the biggest growth is we have distribution of our prepackaged ice cream sandwiches, bars, and pints in about 2,000-plus grocery store and retail outlets all around the country.
Look at you little budding Martha Stewart. You're going to become a mogul. Good for you, kiddo. Now, my brother represents his manager, Will Ferrell, and I know Will digs these, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. We've catered his birthday a few times, and he actually gave us a nice little plug on I believe it was on the Today Show a few years back, but then he, asked for like a, $5 bill as a thank you for plugging us, and I just thought that was a bit much.
Well, listen, I like, you've obviously, folks, when, there's a point when your idea begins to blow up and you think, my God, is this really happening? I think it tends to make people simultaneously, they get a bit of a braggadocio, and then they usually temper that with some sort of feeling of humility where I've got to help somebody else because I can't believe I've had this good fortune. I think you're going to turn your 5-year anniversary party on May 2nd into something that will help some charities, right?
That's right. We're a percentage of proceeds go to 9 Dots, which Freya Streller is very involved with.
What is the cause again? I'm sorry.
It's called 9 Dots. It's like an after-school tutoring program for underserved kids. Inner city, and Freya has been tutoring there for about 6 months once a week, so she's actively involved with them, and so we really wanted to give back to that particular cause.
Well, how sweet. Plus, you got to throw the kids a cone once in a while. There's tutoring, and then there's the cone. I mean,
Exactly. And
where is it going to be? And tell us the details of it and how people can get tickets in the L.A. area.
Fantastic, yeah. The party, so May 2nd, 8 to midnight at the Unique Space, which is around 6 in Alameda in the Arts District in downtown L.A.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we've got, of course, endless ice cream sandwiches. We've got open cocktail bar. We have actually a gourmet jelly shop bar by Ludlow's Cocktail Company. Fried chicken by Free Range, Pizzanista Pizza, live music by Deluxe, which is an LA band we're so excited for. Paul Tao is a DJ. And you can get tickets on Eventbrite. We've been tweeting the link massively, but it's basically tinyurl.com/Coolhouse5, like the number 5, and that's the best way to purchase tickets.
I have never felt more indelibly age 60 than after that paragraph. I realize my time has passed. I'm officially an old man now. As I heard you talking, I feel like Hank Fonda looking for breakwood out at the lake for my summer vacation. We're talking to Natasha Case, and once again, you can go to Eventbrite, BRITE.com. Portion of the proceeds from this party, their 5th anniversary party for Coolhouse, May 2nd, will go to the 9 Dots Children Charity in Hollywood. Sounds like a lovely endeavor, tutoring after schools for in-need children. And who else? You just can't have ice cream. I assume you have some entrees there, too?
Right. We've got a free-range fried chicken, which is actually one of our former employees who spawned his own business. We're very proud of him. Pizzanista Pizza, which is an Arts District delicious pizza company that we love. They'll have a pizza oven there. We've also got a Coolhouse custom tote bag, which has a special 5-year graphic on there that I created myself since, I'm an architect and all, filled with dry soda, Cocoa Mel's, Mountain Valley water, a little savory gift from Whole Foods because they're actually a partner as well. Dwell is also partnering, so they're contributing. And, that Herbal Zap also for the next day after the party, helps you get back on your feet. It's going to be in the tote bag. Deluxe live music. We have a live band there at the Unique Space, so it's going to be just, one hell of a party, I'm not going to lie.
Why don't you custom make your Coolhouse tote bags to have insulation on the inside? Since
that would have been a good idea.
Well, I would say go with it, and I often wonder how exactly free was the range that the free-range chicken was on if it ended up dead on a plate.
Right. I'd have to have a serious conversation with that chicken and see.
Somewhere there must have been a fence out on the perimeter line of the free range if the chicken ended up in my belly.
It's true. Well, you can put it anywhere on the plate you want when you eat it. That's also
that's a liberating thought. The Coolhouse ice cream book also available. Custom-built sandwiches with crazy good combos of cookies, ice creams, gelatos, sorbets. That'll be available May 20th. Like I said, I like people in a culture that I don't often understand now when I hear people talking about job block. I love people who jump in hip deep, find a place, start to work it like, Mr. Miyagi with the bonsai shears, get it up and running, and get fat and happy, and then take care of people who they want to help. So good for you, kiddo. Go take a big bite out of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, Natasha Case, and it's Coolhouse, COOLHAUS. This here is the Dennis Miller Show.
7268.
Hey, folks. Welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show. Joining us now is our friend Joe Connor. I always have to remind some of the listeners, unfortunately, his father, Frank Connor, was killed by members of the FALN terrorist organization, who were then granted clemency by Eric Holder and the Clinton administration. Hey, Joe, how are you?
Hey,
Good, Dennis. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Welcome. My pleasure. I was listening to Holder, and I was thinking, my God, how must this grate on our friend Joe Connor to hear Holder talk about, over the years, comments that he and Obama have somehow been treated more harshly because of their race. And when I think of you, I just think, wow, my friend's been treated harshly. I don't think it's about race, but certainly they know harsh treatment.
Yeah, I mean, you almost want to laugh, but it's so irritating and infuriating to hear him whining, literally whining about how he's been unjustly treated due to race. He kind of forgets about the release of the terrorists that killed my dad, about Mark Rich, about being held in contempt of Congress, about the voter intimidation, about Benghazi, about the terror trials being delayed. Here's a guy, Dennis, and I'm sorry for ranting, but here's a guy who accused Americans of being cowards when it comes to race, yet he won't even admit that it's his actions and not his race that has caused the backlash against him. So who's the coward? I mean, it's contemptible, so to speak.
Well, listen, there's the cowardly part of that, and there's the nasty part. I think this guy's a nasty piece of work, man. And when you have guys like him throwing the racist accusation around, I quite frankly think people ought to get out of his way because, man, God bless you, you got to hang in there because you owe it to your father's memory. But I think that Eric Holder can cause you a lot of problems in your life with that accusation.
Well, I mean, me personally, he probably could, but if Dennis, if we
no, you've got a sacred legacy you've got to uphold, though. I'm just saying, I think that guy would destroy somebody racially if he could, if they were on to something.
I think you're right. I think he would, and but you got to do what's right, and so if Holder, he is capable of anything. I mean, if you release terrorists that the FBI is telling you could still go kill people, what wouldn't you do? You know what I mean? So I put nothing past him, and but someone's got to stand up to him, and there's a lot of good people in this country that do, but we all got to tell the truth.
Well, I think in retrospect you were truth-telling and really prescient that the 2009 Senate Attorney General confirmation hearing, you said he lacked judgment, character, honesty, and belief system. But I'll tell you what, man, he serves he's a made man for life, I think, because he kind of sacrificed a lot of the things you mentioned there in your accusation to prove himself the president's man.
Yeah, he did, and it's funny because when I do look at that, it's like, wow, this guy's going to be Attorney General, and if I was able to see that, anyone really who was paying attention could have seen it. But almost half the Republicans even voted for him.
I know.
So it's
mind-boggling.
The fix was in. You know what I mean?
Mind-boggling. You think that they would have just said, we can't do this in lieu of, well, I would like to think Francis Tavern first because of you, but it seems to me that that's so far in the past, they have an easy way of assuaging that out of their guilt. But the Mark Rich thing, you know what I mean? There's just so many things that you would think they'd say, we can't approve this guy. But half the Republicans, as you said, pushed him through.
They voted for him. But this stuff will come up again. I mean, and I'm thinking, if Hillary's going to run, these releases were done to help her. So
right, explain that connection there, Joe. We're talking to Joe Connor, and his father was unfortunately killed in a FALN terrorist attack at a New York City establishment called the Francis Tavern. And then Holder played a key part in going for the pardons of the people who perpetrated that crime, and that paid off for the Clintons, I guess. And so Hillary's entry into the race will fan the flames of it again, right?
Yeah, it was back in 1999 when Hillary Clinton was getting ready to run for senator from New York. She had no connection to New York. She was a total carpetbagger. So they concocted this idea if they released these terrorists and say that they were nonviolent terrorists, because they weren't specifically convicted of the Francis bombing, although they were part of the conspiracy that did it, and they admitted doing it and all that stuff in their notes when after the bombing had happened, and they were all convicted of 70 years in prison and sentenced to 70 years in prison. So they were trying to get Hillary some some traction with the Latino vote. So they were telling the people here, and I live in the New York area, oh, they were nonviolent, they were freedom fighters, they're really good people. And unless we had stood up, and it was my brother and me and some other people stood up and said, wait a second, do you know who they really were? And we made it very clear in '99. They would have just been released before we even, they would have been out of prison. We wouldn't have been able to even tell what they were like. But they didn't accept the clemencies right away. One of them didn't accept it at all and stayed in prison. 3 years ago, I went to the prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, to face him, and we kept him in at his parole hearing. So these were really unrepentant terrorists. They were trying to get Hillary Clinton some traction in New York, and Eric Holder came up with this great idea when he was Deputy Attorney General under Clinton to have them released to get Hillary some traction in New York where she had nothing. And so she's going to have to answer to that when the big run comes in a couple of years, right?
Well, I certainly think you'll be there to ask the question. And must never forget. When we continue more with our friend Joe Connor and your calls at 866-509-RANT, this is the Dennis Miller Show. I don't know about you, but I don't like taking pills for minor arthritis pain, and I don't like those patches either. But I have found something that works. Australian Dream Arthritis Pain Relief Cream. Doesn't smell, doesn't burn, isn't greasy, and it works. An Australian Dream has an empty jar guarantee. You can use the whole jar. If you say you're not happy, you get your money back. I don't think you're going to send it back, though. The stuff works. For relief from minor arthritis pain, get Australian Dream. Available at Target. Welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show. Still with us, our friend Joe Connor. His father, Frank Connor, I should hit the refresh button, killed by FALN terrorists at the France's Tavern in New York. And eventually Eric Holder works for their release. Let's talk about your family has had to come to grips with the amazing righteous indignation you must feel on a daily basis. I'm looking at some of these 9/11 families now who are the 9/11 families at Gitmo, and they're pissed off about the terror trial delays, right?
Yeah, and rightly so. These things have been delayed and delayed and delayed, and there's lots of stories whether the delays are coming from the defense or the prosecution. In my mind, it's mainly from the defense. They are trying to push this thing back, but I think the prosecution, which falls under Eric Holder, I think they're not innocent in this either. I think both sides have the goal of getting these trials out of Guantanamo Bay and into federal court in New York or some other jurisdiction. It would probably be New York. And so I think they're both on the same page when it comes to this. And so what happens is they delay it, they push it back. There are family members down in Cuba waiting for these things. And so no one's getting hurt except the family members again. And so what's happened is they've been politicized. The attacks, to me, I was there when my cousin was killed at the World Trade Center. I had commuted through the Trade Center. I saw the planes hit. My cousin Steve worked for Cantor, and so he was killed only a few blocks from my father. My father was killed almost 40 years ago when I was 9. But for family members, that time is irrelevant. And it brings back this pain. And so once again, the family members are being used as pawns with some political ping pong going on. And, it's horrendous, really, is what it boils down to. They treat the family members with no respect because they're just looking to gain some political advantage.
Oh, imagine the surviving family members of the Cantor employees and indeed everybody in both towers when they hear Mayor de Blasio getting in. This always blew my mind that when Nancy Pelosi got in. John Bolton, when Nancy Pelosi became Speaker of the House, her first gesture was to get rid of John Bolton in the UN. I'm amazed that de Blasio feels he has to make a statement by shutting down what has heretofore been a very successful surveillance operation, right?
Yeah. In New York, where I live here, and they talk about is it political correctness that's shutting it down? And there's a couple of things going on with that. One is it's way past political correctness, and that term's been bandied about, and it sounds kind of innocuous, but it's really sinister. And like I said on Fox the other day, it's political correctness used to be a nuisance. Now it's a noose, and it's hanging around our necks, and people are going to die because of it. So it's nothing innocuous. It's nothing flimsy. It's a really sinister idea where you twist history and you twist your real beliefs for some political gain, and that's what that is. And the other part.
Why do you think Bratton's involved? Can I ask you before we go next? Bratton always seems to me to be a smart, savvy, live in the real world guy.
I know.
How did they get
I know. So if you have a guy like him who's on board with this,
yes, he's giving it heft.
It's really scary. I mean, and when you think about it too, Dennis, like, why do we even know that there was this surveillance? Like, so we shouldn't. First of all, we shouldn't know there was this surveillance program, and we certainly shouldn't know when it's turned off, unless the politicians want us to know. And why would they want us to know? Because they get some political gain. So we're seeing once again that they're using the terrorism for politics. And the program itself was, why would they focus on the Muslims? Well, Willie Sutton said he robbed banks because that's where the money is.
Right.
It's the same thing. Unfortunately, that's where the terrorism today is coming from. And if you don't focus on it, then you're really doing you're letting your people down, and you're going to get people killed.
Yeah,
it's a dangerous situation.
If you did and people always are going to bring up McVeigh, like everybody's been McVeigh or everybody's been a Tea Party member or a fundamentalist Christian. But if you went back and did a LexisNexis search of This World headlines over the last 50 years and most acts of terror, it would have to be 99.9% have emanated from the radical Islamic fundamentalist community. So you go hang around there to try to get the information. It's just as maddening when Torricelli pushed through legislation that says our CIA wasn't allowed to deal with felons. And you thought, for God's sakes, who are we going to get information from?
Exactly.
The good guys? We cut off our nose to blow up our state.
Dennis, like the politicians are so far removed from what the actual people go through. When I testified at Holder's confirmation hearing, it was like Jeff Sessions, who I actually like, but Patrick Leahy and Arlen Specter and these guys sitting like above, looking down on the people testifying, and it was really symbolic to me of the way they behave. They're condescending. They believe that we are, and this way I was taking it as they talked to me, like I was sort of the poor dreg of society that, I would have terrorism happen in my family twice. Like that couldn't happen to them. So they live in this world that is so removed, and the founders would have been appalled by
jerks.
These career politicians.
Even
I
the
never
good ones are jerks.
Of term limits, but my God, we need to get these bums out and bring in fresh blood who actually know what's going on in this country.
Citizen politicians, as opposed to politicians, citizens.
Yeah.
Look at this Bundy guy out in Nevada, for God's sakes. Now they're going to start, look at this Bundy guy out in Nevada. Now they're going to start painting him as the problem, when after all, at some point, can we stop shutting people's lifestyles down for tortoises and Delta smelts? I mean, you're begging for problems when you do this. Yeah, sure, the guy's been driven apoplectic to the point where, he's bridling at local legislation and fines and stuff. And there's a party that thinks, well, if we don't have laws, we have chaos. If we're going to have laws like we found a tortoise on your property, you can't graze, we're asking for trouble. That's insane.
Well, look out by where you live, right? Aren't they
the Delta smelt
because of a fish? I think you meant.
There's a little fish that resembles a spermatozoa on human growth hormone, and it lives. And they're shutting down water flowing to the most fertile farmland in not only California, indeed some of the world, to preserve this thing. I went up and met with men one night who had part of their farmland shut down. They wanted me to try to do something. I talk about it on the air. They were so beaten down, man. You could see the sallow look in their eye, like, can you believe they've done this to me and my family? And then they'd show me a picture of the smelt. It's crazy.
And the Bundy thing is the same case. And, and it's funny because I was thinking about the Bundy case too. And I'll tell you, one thing I haven't heard mentioned is I think this Bundy case is the complete justification when the founders put in the Second Amendment, because if his supporters and the other ranchers in that area didn't show up with guns, and I'm not saying I want a gunfight or anything like that, far from it, but if they didn't, do you think the feds would have returned his property to him? Or do you think they just would have run roughshod over the group there? I think when the founders said they were trying to stop a tyrannical government by allowing people to defend themselves, I think that's exactly what just happened in Nevada. And I'm not a proponent of lawlessness, but my God, when we have a government where our president is changing the rules on Obamacare every week and then lecturing people that we have to abide by the law, it does make you feel like our government's getting a little bit out of hand, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I also don't know how to go down the route where you talk about people showing up with guns in any way, except I guess at this point I still have to say I wish they'd tried it without the guns, the citizens, and seen, because somebody's going to get blown up. I mean, listen, it's going to be Kent State. So it's going to be Kent State. Somebody's going to get an itchy trigger finger, and somebody's going to get killed. So I wish these confluences or these contentious things would take place without guns, but I guess they're not for a while. And it's only a matter of time in my book. So if you ask me, do I wish Bundy and all his friends would have shown up the first time without guns? Yes, I do. And that's asking way more of them than you'd ask of the government. But the government are dolts. But I do know this. It would have proved to the world in some sort of Mahatma Gandhi way that they would have just shunned them away. And then maybe the next time when it happens, people start to understand more that you just cannot push people around without pushing them to the edge.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but the Fed showed up with lots of weapons, and
no, that was bad. That was wrong on their part.
Yeah, it was, and I said I'm not in favor of a gunfight, but I'm thinking that people stood their ground, and no one did get hurt, thank God, but people actually did stand their ground against their own country.
Well, keep in mind they took.
I was born 1966, so Kent State I think was 1970. I was a little kid when that happened, but we haven't seen much of that, and thank God, nothing. It didn't escalate.
Well, listen, know this: Cliven Bundy lost his ranch that day. At age 65, they're going to bank on the actuary tables. He's probably out in 10 to 15 years. When his kid goes to take it, because he'll will it to him, it won't be there for him. It'll have been put a lien put on it, and they'll own it. So it was a happy day in a way. I remember thinking, good for this guy. He got sick of it, and nobody got hurt. And then on the other end, I thought, but that poor SOB just lost his ranch right there. Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen down the road, Joe. My imagination allows me to think about it, but my mouth doesn't allow me to say it out loud. But something weird's coming in this world if they're going to keep taking farmers' livelihoods away from them over tortoises. Something wicked this way comes.
I'm with you, man. And it's sick that we can see it happening, and we have some power, but not enough power to stop it.
Yeah, because you know what? We're civilized. I mean, nobody wants to start what has to, happen to, in some people's minds to overturn this. We keep thinking, well, let's just wait and see. Certainly the government will wake up. They'll wake up. They'll get it. You can't do this. They're not.
They're not. and it goes, Dennis, it doesn't have to happen. This stuff just happens slowly. As half the country's watching the Kardashians, they're getting their country taken away.
Yeah, the sun is blotted out by the ass. All right, Joey. Good to talk to you, brother.
My pleasure, Dennis. Take care, my friend.
All right. Joe Connor. And I ran long. Dennis Miller.
The Dennis Miller Show.